that there was a period of time where I was afraid to do anything on my own, especially after the craniotomy.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of family members sort of rotating babysitting duty,
Yeah.
because I was afraid to, I legitimately wasn't capable of doing certain things, but I also was afraid to be alone too.
Yeah.
And what quickly developed was a sense of frustration I was frustrated at being treated like I was helpless, but I also felt like I was helpless.
Yeah.
And so what quickly developed was I would get mad at myself for feeling like I was helpless and feeling like I needed the help. And then when family members would try and step in and help, I would be like, I don't need that. Leave me alone.
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gassiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Bill from recoveryafterstroke.com. This is episode 110, and my guest today is Jason Depetris. Jason was preparing for a marathon, and one day before the event, he started to feel the classic symptoms of stroke, including speech issues, facial droop, and numbness on his left side. Now, when you get to the end of this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast app, please do me a favor and share this episode in other groups you hang out in. This will help someone that is doing it tough at the moment perhaps feel a little better about the journey they are on. Also, if you feel this podcast makes a massive difference to the stroke community, please do me a favor and give the show a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts from. Now it's on with the show. Jason Depetris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's always lovely to hear from a person who wants to be on the podcast and reaches out to me. It really makes a massive difference, actually, because I don't have to do all the work to find people. So thank you as well. Mate, tell me a little bit about what happened to you.
So I'm relatively new to the recovery journey. In October of last year, so October of 2019, I was traveling in Chicago. I'm from Los Angeles. I was traveling in Chicago, and I was actually there to compete in the Chicago Marathon. And the day before the marathon, we were sitting in a restaurant having breakfast, and it started with my hand went numb and I dropped my fork on the ground. And I didn't immediately think that there was anything super unusual about that, because I've had issues with a pinched nerve in my neck for years, had seen a chiropractor for years, and I had gotten numb hands before. So it was kind of annoying, but I wasn't alarmed. So then the numbness started to spread up my arm. And shortly after that, my speech started to get slurred. My face started to droop. And when I really started to get scared was, I was traveling with my spouse and my mother. My mom looked at me and she goes, "Your face is drooping. Go look in the mirror." And when I got up to go to the bathroom, my leg wasn't working properly. I was sort of half limping, half dragging my leg. And that's when I got scared. And then by the time the paramedics arrived, I was fully paralyzed on the left side, and I was actually kind of sliding out of the chair. My head was lolling back. I was kind of sliding out of the chair, and I never really completely lost consciousness, but I was definitely not all there.
Yeah.
So by dumb luck, the restaurant we happened to be eating at was just a couple blocks from the hospital. Just by chance. So I arrived at the hospital very quickly. I was very fortunate that they were able to administer the TPA right away. The part that my family sort of still teases me about is still it wasn't funny at the time, but it's kind of funny now. With the lack of oxygen to my brain and, I was, not all there. I was so focused on the marathon and all the training I had done that in the ER, when they're telling me you're having a stroke, I was actually arguing with my family saying, I got to get out of here. I have to run the race tomorrow. And they were like, "Jason, you're having a stroke. You're not going anywhere." So I just chalked that up to lack of oxygen. But, and then during the CAT scan, they also discovered a large fusiform aneurysm in believe it's called my MCA and my right MCA.
So not only did you miss out on breakfast, now that we're going to stop you from going to a marathon.
Exactly. I was not happy about that.
What were you having for breakfast?
I was having pancakes.
Carb loading so you can have some energy for the marathon. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some interesting thing, the thing that you said about trying to convince people to let you go to the marathon, that is so common. People having a stroke are oblivious to the seriousness of what is happening to them, and they think it's just business as usual. And
Hmm.
you're not the only person. I did the same thing. I had a bleed in my brain 3 times. I had it once in February of 2012, once in 6 weeks later, and then once in November of 2014. And the first time that it happened, I went to work for 7 days with the same sensations that you had, that you
Oh my
experienced,
God.
and walked with a numb foot, got on ladders with a numb foot, made no difference to me whatsoever. My wife even told me I was walking strange. I ignored her. I went to the chiropractor instead of the doctor. The chiropractor told me to go to the doctor, to the hospital. I ignored him. I argued with him as well. Like
Hmm.
it's so unbelievable how we minimize things that are happening to us just so that we can do work or I don't know what, achieve running in a
Well,
marathon.
this happens to other people, not to us, right? I mean, that's the way we think. Is this doesn't happen to me?
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
indeed. Exactly right. I was 37. How old were you?
I was 41 when it happened.
Other than that incident at the cafe while you were eating, was there any signs before that that maybe something is going on in hindsight?
In hindsight, possibly. We think the doctors presume that it was actually the brain aneurysm that caused the clot to dislodge or lodge or whatever you want to call it and cause the stroke. We think that I probably had the aneurysm for many, many years. Also because it's a very large brain aneurysm. I had never had any medical incidents before that. Looking back, there were some kind of odd symptoms in the months leading up to it that I didn't pay attention to at the time that were not severe enough for me to go to the doctor, but I think maybe something was happening.
So, the aneurysm that was found later, but your stroke seemed to be because of a clot.
Hmm.
Do they know the underlying cause of that?
They believe, although there's really no way to know for sure after the fact, but they believe that a clot formed in sort of in the base of the aneurysm, and something caused it to dislodge and get sort of stuck in the artery.
Wow. So this clot that almost killed you has also quite possibly saved your life because now they found the aneurysm that maybe caused it, right? So what did they do to the aneurysm to treat it?
So yeah, and you're absolutely right. That's pretty much what the surgeons told me, is that that's probably in a strange way a good thing that this happened, because had the aneurysm ruptured, I very likely would not have survived that. When I returned home from Chicago, I saw a team of neurosurgeons here in Southern California, and they ended up doing a craniotomy and an attempted cerebral bypass. So they harvested an artery from my arm and they attempted a bypass around the aneurysm, and they were going to clip the aneurysm, but that was unsuccessful. So they basically, what happened was, during the surgery, the blood vessels began to spasm, and so they were unable to get blood to flow into the bypass. And I also had a seizure on the operating table as well, so they were unable to complete the bypass and clip. They completed the bypass, but nothing was flowing into it. And they, after many, many tries and about double the amount of time that I was planned for the operation, they finally just closed up all my incisions, because it was safer not to proceed any further. So about almost exactly 4 weeks after the craniotomy, I underwent a stent and coiling at another hospital for the aneurysm, and that ultimately did work. Although that was successful and the stent and coiling did work, although ironically, on July 21st, so just a couple weeks ago, I did experience a TIA, and I was hospitalized again. And they discovered during that hospitalization that the stent is almost entirely blocked with blood clot. So we're now at the stage where we're trying to figure out what the next steps are and why that happened.
Okay. So treating that blood clot with uh, blood thinning medication, I imagine, at the moment.
Yeah.
So how does it make you feel going through all of that and then getting to this point and then having a small episode a little while ago? What did that experience make you feel?
It's been quite a ride. For a long time, after the original stroke, the sort of elephant in the room for me for a long time was the aneurysm, not the stroke. I was much more afraid of the aneurysm than I was of having another stroke. Frankly, again, with the whole "this happens to other people, not to me" kind of mentality, frankly, hadn't even occurred to me that, oh, this could happen again. I thought, well, it's been dealt with, it's been solved. I was much more afraid of the aneurysm. Um, this was a reality check. A lot of the fear and the anxiety that I thought I had dealt with and that I thought I was sort of past has now come screaming back into the picture. So that's been fun.
That's interesting, isn't it? I went in, I was told something so dramatic. There's a blood vessel in your head that is leaking, there's blood coming out into your brain. And for me, the initial um, the initial experience wasn't dramatic enough to concern me about what the future might hold. It was, oh, well, it's just something that happens, they'll fix it up, whatever. They said it's unlikely to bleed a second time. So I ran with that part of it. And
Mhm.
6 weeks later, when it happened again, it became so dramatic. I couldn't recognize my wife. And then when I came out of hospital that time, I had to go through a whole process of learning how to type an email again, memorizing, driving, all those things that just went out the window immediately. That's how dramatic it had to get for me to start taking notice that this
Mhm.
thing was serious and that I might not be around in a few months' time. Do those things cross your mind? Did you have the I'm mortal conversation with yourself?
Yeah. This TIA really scared me because for a few reasons. The first time this happened in Chicago, I didn't know what was happening as it was happening. The second time when I had the TIA, it looked, felt, sounded identical to the original stroke, so I knew exactly what was happening, and it was terrifying
Mm.
because my first thought was I really kind of dodged a bullet the first time. I came away with relatively minor deficits compared to a lot of stroke patients, and my thought was, what deficits am I going to have this time? That's what I was thinking as I was waiting for the ambulance to arrive, and it did actually create some deficits. Luckily, again, I was very, very lucky, but the deficits are more severe than they were before. I'm starting physical therapy. I didn't have much in the way of physical deficits the first time. Now I'm much weaker on that side. My knee buckles underneath me. It's, so it is definitely more noticeable. It is more scary to me this time for sure.
Is that left side or right side?
Left side.
Yeah. So the knee buckling, that's something that I had, and it continues. From time to time, when I'm tired, it sort of gives way. And
Hmm.
you're so early on in the process, and uncertainty is normal. Feelings that you have are quite normal. So what will happen is, as things start to progress and you start to resolve some of the challenges, the underlying challenges that are there, you'll start to feel better and better about it. And then they'll become things that you just live with that don't really get in the way of the majority of the things that you do. But running might be something that you don't get back to for us for some time, right?
Hmm.
Your need to run in marathons, what was behind that? What was the reason you decided to start running marathons?
That was it was kind of my form of meditation. I've always been a very, very active person. I've always been a workaholic. I have always had trouble sitting still, and the marathon running was my form of meditation. That's how I would turn my brain off, and that's how I would process information and things like that.
So The big question is, how do you turn your brain off now?
That's something I'm still working with and learning about. I do a lot of mindfulness meditation.
Yep.
I do a lot of journaling. I enjoy writing. I'm writing a book right now. That's kind of my form of doing that now. I yeah, definitely been a learning process, and I'm trying so hard. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I wish that none of this had ever happened, but if it was going to happen, I'm sort of glad it happened on the timeline it did. I'm glad that the TIA was 9 months after the stroke, because I had some time to process and kind of learn how to deal with this stuff. I definitely have the fear and the anxiety and all of those things that I'm sure you know I have, but I've had some time to learn how to manage those. So it is scary, but I'm much more prepared, I think, this time to accept it as, you know what, setbacks happen. They're inevitable. That's part of recovery. That's what recovery looks like. And that's not a reason to just quit. So,
Do you think that your previous process of preparing for marathons is serving you right now?
100 million%, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very parallel or analogous kind of process, I think.
Yeah. And what kind of work were you doing before you had the stroke? What kind of work are you involved in?
I'm in the financial services industry.
Is there a lot of problem solving in that space?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And it seems to me that you've brought problem solving, you've brought marathon running, and all the things that are associated with getting to the finish line. You've brought that to your stroke recovery, in that I've got these skills that I've used in the past to overcome challenges, issues, problems at work, on the track, running, practicing, and therefore I can bring those into this stroke space and become curious about how to solve my problems in this space, how to occupy my mind. What else are you doing other than occupying your mind? I went into straight away into nutrition. Like, okay, so I'm probably eating terrible food. I'm smoking, I'm drinking. I'll stop all of that. Let me do what I can do with as little effort as possible to control something. And for me, I could easily control my food. And controlling my food wasn't about control. It was about doing what I could with as little effort as possible, which meant that I ate less things that weren't good for me, and I just increased the things that were good for me.
Hmm.
So do you relate to that type of method of solving problems?
Yeah, I think so. I think if I'm understanding what you mean, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've tried to, well, I'm trying to be open. I don't know a clear way to say this. I'm trying to be open to what this experience has to teach me.
Nice.
Clearly, it's not done. Clearly, I don't know everything, and I can't control everything. So I've really tried to be open to learning to worry about just the stuff that I can control. I've always been sort of high strung and a worrier before, and this really has been a lesson in there's a million things on my list now that I could worry about that are legitimate things to worry about,
Yeah.
but it's all wasted energy. So I like what you said. I try and just now worry about what I have control over, and not. But one of my best friends, she calls it future tripping, and so I try and stop future tripping. Stop worrying about what might or might not happen. Stop worrying about what has happened. I mean, I told you I had a pinched nerve, and for years I was going to the chiropractor. Well, I can't tell you how many times I have second guessed myself and thought, did that contribute to this event?
Yeah.
Did all of that neck cracking, did that cause a stroke? The truth is, I don't know. There's no way to know. It may have, it may not have. At this point, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I am where I am. I can't control that. What I can control is what I do today. Like you said, my diet, what I eat, whether or not I follow the doctor's orders, whether or not I take time for self-care and to reflect and to relax and slow down my life.
Mm.
Another way that I do kind of what you were describing is I prioritize my strokes are not uncommon, and aneurysms are not uncommon, but I've been told by several doctors my specific combination of facts in my case is very unusual. I literally have a team of doctors treating me. I have so many doctors I can't even remember all of them. One of the things that I've done is prioritize, I even reached out to a doctor today and said, do I really need to see this other doctor? I already have 3 different neurologists that are treating me already. Do I need 4 neurologists? You know what I mean? So I've tried to pare that down too and say, okay, what's reasonable? What makes sense? I'm not going to ignore the doctor's orders, but if I follow everything the doctor said, my medical file is 500 pages thick at this point. I need to figure out what actually is reasonable and makes sense and is, can I handle?
Yeah, it sounds like it's time for focus rather than having everything going on at the same time. It's just narrow the focus and just go for a couple of things that you can do that are going to support your physical well-being, your mental well-being, B.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really, really important. For me, I did similar. I had doctors come into my hospital bed, the first hospital that I was taken to, and they would talk about me and they wouldn't include me in the conversation. That used to frustrate me. So I left that hospital and basically sacked that team and hired another team, so to speak. Went to another hospital, found another group of doctors who worked the way that I needed them to work, which was very small amounts of information, but very focused and narrow communication style, in that this is what happened, this is what we're exploring, this is what we did, this is what didn't work, this is what we're going to try. None of the other stuff mattered. I just needed to know I didn't need to know the details. I just needed to know the outcome or the goal that they had in mind. So then what I did is prepared myself so that I could support them in them reaching that goal, which was to learn to remain still. I meditated. I changed my diet. I changed what I drank. I changed my relationships and how I behaved and what I did with the family and friends that perhaps loved me, but I used to piss off all the time and yell and scream at. And all of those things, all that time that I had, enabled me to step into this space that was calmer. Therefore, my blood pressure would be lower. Therefore, my stress hormone would be lower. Therefore, my heart rate would be better. Therefore, all these other things, peripheral things, would be impacted by me making these small changes. And that allowed me to be the best patient. And I told this to my surgeon and her team on the bed that they were preparing me for surgery. I said to them, I'm going to be the best patient you've ever had. I've done all the preparation work for you so that you can have to just deal with the problem in there, not this whole problem with the guy who's losing his shit and is, all over the place. And whether they paid attention to that or not doesn't matter. But it made me actually turn up in a better place, and therefore I wasn't getting in the way of any of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me 3 years to get to that point. I had been at all the personal development courses that you could imagine up until that day. But nothing really mattered until I took responsibility for me and I started to change my life in very small ways that had massive, massive impacts, right? So it sounds like you're very similar in the way that you're approaching this. And I think that's going to serve you really, really well, especially going forward, because stroke doesn't go away. The damn thing happens, and then for some reason it never leaves people's lives. People talk about that stroke they had 30 years ago, and they talk about it like it just happened. Some people talk about it like it was the best thing that ever happened to them. That's me. I can say that now, but it wasn't at the beginning. Some people talk about it like it's completely ruined their life still, and it's 20 or 30 years down the track. So you may as well, if you're going to be talking about your stroke 20 years from now, you may as well be talking about it from the space of, this is what it taught me. This is how I changed. This is how I evolved. This is how I adapted. This is how I became curious about new things I didn't before. And the fact that only it seems what, only 11 or so months or 10 months into your process, you're already on a stroke podcast. Who would have thought a year
Mhm.
ago that you would have been talking about the topic of stroke on a stroke podcast?
Yeah, agreed. And I absolutely relate to what you're saying. And it doesn't mean that I'm like there yet. I mean, I have a lot to go through and a lot to learn, I'm sure still.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
But I relate to what you're saying. And one of the things that you said that I connect with is the taking responsibility for myself. There was one particular moment early on in my recovery that was sort of a turning point, which was when I first came home from the hospital after the craniotomy. I mean, I was not in good shape. I was using a walker. I was literally so weak that I could not recline the recliner that we had bought. So my husband and I bought a recliner because in anticipation of, we knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep in the bed. And I was so weak, I could not even pull the lever to raise the recliner. And I was literally being weighted on hand and foot because I physically was that weak, but I also had it in my head that I couldn't do anything. And one of the early turning points for me was there was a day where I realized my pill case was empty and it needed to be repopulated. And my spouse was working and was on a call, and I was gonna go get him to do it, and then I was like, no, I can do this. And so I got it, and I had visual issues from the stroke and whatever, so it's hard for me to read the labels and stuff, but I was like, no, I can figure this out. And I sat down, I lined up all the pill bottles, and I lined up the pill case, and it took me a long time, but I repopulated all the pills. And he came into the room and he's like, oh, do you need me to fill the pill case? And I said, no, I did it. And he was like, oh, you did? And I was like, that was like an aha moment for me, that like, okay, this is what it's going to take, is I need to step up and do, even if it's something that simple.
Yeah.
I need to step up and start taking care of that myself. I need to be the one to call the doctors.
Yeah.
I need to be the one to send the emails. It might take me longer to do it, but that's part of the recovery.
It's the marathon analogy. I mean, you don't start the marathon thinking about the last step on the marathon that's going to get you over the line. Click, there's the time. That's not how you start the marathon. You start it with the first step, and you've just got to make each next step, and you've just got to get to the end of the marathon. And in episode 108, which is the one that I released a couple of days ago, I re-released it because I recorded it, I think, for episode 27, which was a number of years ago. I interviewed a gentleman called Dr. Michael Merzenich, who he's one of the founding fathers of the current research studies that have gone into neuroplasticity. And we speak about neuroplasticity as this positive thing, that we can use neuroplasticity in our favor. We can use it to benefit us, to learn, to rewire the brain. But neuroplasticity also works in the opposite way. We can rewire the brain to support negative thoughts and to support negative processes and physical actions. So that thing that you did, it could have gone one way or another for you. If it went the other way, it meant that you were learning how not to do things. You were learning how difficult it was. You were learning how not to struggle through. You were learning how not to take responsibility. So that is one of those things that people don't understand. They are in a vulnerable state. Their brain is changing rapidly, trying to adjust, and it's going to take the path of least resistance. And if the path of that least resistance is the one that you chose to not do anything, it's going to go, fine, we'll do that one. And then you wire not being able to do things, and then that stays with people. And sometimes that gets in the way of recovery way more than the physical ailments.
That's fascinating. I never thought of neuroplasticity from that angle. I never thought about the fact that it could go both ways. That's fascinating.
Yeah, we can control neuroplasticity one way or another, and what we choose determines the experience that we're going to have. So 108 is the episode. Michael Merzenich, he's an amazing guy. They invented the world's first cochlear implant, which was back in the 90s. And at some point they had an aha moment where they realized that the cochlear implant is pretty much useless if the brain doesn't change to adapt to listening through an electronic device.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what made the cochlear implant successful. It was the fact that it had the brain on its side, and the brain used the electronic devices to listen. So it changed the game for what it meant about how to support people overcoming conditions that were so serious that hearing was gone, for example. And the guy that Michael worked in conjunction with, or at a similar time with, that was also studying, was a guy called Paul Bacchi-Rita. And Paul Bacchi-Rita was trying to support people to overcome vision loss with mechanical devices strapped to the forehead. Mm-hmm. And they were able to successfully get a blind person, somebody that had been blind from a few years after their birth, to be able to see a garbage bin on the other side of a room and throw a basketball at that garbage bin and actually get it in. And the way they did that was this device on the forehead created different responses depending on where the hand was and where all these certain things were. And it somehow created a black and white image in that person's brain to be able to show them that, in fact, in the distance is this garbage bin and you're holding the ball here. And if you do that, you'll be able to get it towards the bin. And then the more they practiced, the more that person was able to calibrate distance and the amount of time they needed and the effort they needed and so on to get the ball and push it in through the air into the bin. So neuroplasticity is amazing, but what people don't realize is they are activating neuroplasticity when they make a decision that's not serving them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not wire that stuff in.
Yeah, there's already enough of that stuff in the world.
Yeah, especially now, we're going through the most craziest time ever. I have never had so much in common with every person on the planet as I do now. Lockdowns, the fear around COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff. And we can get ourselves all worked up and have all of that stuff to worry about, as well as how we're recovering from stroke, or we can just worry about recovering from stroke and what the next solution to our problems are. I'm curious about your family, your husband, and the people that were with you at that cafe when this thing happened. Have you had a conversation with them about what they went through?
Yes, we've had several conversations about that. I think that was not just a terrifying experience for me. I think it was a terrifying experience for them too. I'll never forget the look on my mom's face when Jeremy pulled out the phone and said, "I'm calling 911." I'll never forget the look on my mom's face. And there's a lot I don't remember from that day, but I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the things your mum has said about that time? Has she even spoken about it?
A little bit. On the humorous side of things, trying to look at the bright side of things. One of the things that we've all kind of talked about since that incident was that my mom has this sort of curious combination of, in the actual crisis moment, in the emergency, she's cool as a cucumber. She handles everything. She just gets it done. But she had several emotional breakdowns throughout the week at just weird, odd times that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
So like in the moment when we're calling the ambulance and I'm being loaded and I'm being taken in for surgery and all that, she was very, very on top of things. But then at just bizarre moments in the hospital room when we're sitting there, eating lunch, talking, she would break down and start crying, or the nurse would come in and check on me and she would start crying.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think I think there's a lot that went into that, and I think it's hard to see anybody that you care about going through something scary like that, and then I think the combination of that and also trying to stay strong for them, I think is difficult. I have a younger brother who is 18 years younger than me, and we never lived together because by the time he was born, I was out of the house living on my own. So we have sort of an uncle nephew kind of relationship, and I had never seen him cry. I don't think he had ever seen me cry, and that I was told by several family members that in the waiting room in the hospital when I was having the craniotomy, that he broke down and had a pretty big moment because the surgery wasn't going well. They didn't know if I was going to make it out of the surgery. It's been interesting to see everybody's reaction along the way.
Yeah. Did you find yourself going into allaying everyone's concern mode? I'm from a big Greek family. Everyone loses their shit. Yeah, they pretend that they're okay. They pretend that everything's well, but they can't pull it off. Like, they're terrible. Um, so I spent most of my time, because I was so comfortable in my own approach, my nearly 3 year preparation for surgery, because I was so comfortable in my approach, I found myself constantly allaying the concerns of everybody else and saying, it'll be right, I'm fine, and all that kind of stuff. But I really believed it. I wasn't just telling them for the sake of telling them. Were you playing that role as well?
Maybe a little bit. I think that what I found myself doing more than what you're describing is I it was such a frightening experience for me, especially somebody who I never had any health issues before that. I'd never even spent the night in the hospital before this happened. Um, I it was so frightening that there was a period of time where I was afraid to do anything on my own, especially after the craniotomy.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of family members sort of rotating babysitting duty,
Yeah.
because I was afraid to, I legitimately wasn't capable of doing certain things, but I also was afraid to be alone too.
Yeah.
And what quickly developed was a sense of frustration at being I was frustrated at being treated like I was helpless, but I also felt like I was helpless.
Yeah.
And so what quickly developed was I would get mad at myself for feeling like I was helpless and feeling like I needed the help. And then when family members would try and step in and help, I would be like, I don't need that. Leave me alone. And it was this weird sort of circle that it took me a while to get out of.
So you're helpless. You're happy to have the help, but at the same time, you are angry for being helpless and having help.
Exactly. Exactly. Which of course is completely fair to my family members that are trying to help me.
It's such a bizarre space to be in. I remember my dad, and I've said it before in other episodes, being my designated driver for everything, right? And he's such a shit driver, and I was just so frustrated to be in the car with him. It was because I'm a typical backseat driver, telling people what to do and where to go and all that type of thing. And now I had my dad driving me around. He was doing me this amazing favor. He couldn't do anything else, but he could drive. So he said, you know what, I'll be his driver. And I just used to get so annoyed and frustrated with him. And I just think back at how terrible that was. But I get it. It's just loops. You create these loops and you sometimes can't get out of them. You've just got to ride through them. And I remember even yelling and telling my wife she did the worst thing in the world because she parked in the wrong car space. I mean, I couldn't drive. I couldn't do anything. And she parked in the wrong car space. And I told her off about it. I'm pretty sure I brought her close to tears. It was such a terrible time, but it was part of the learning process. And she's so mild mannered that she put up with most of my junk and most of my stupidity. And then at least I had ability to recognize later that I had been an idiot and that an apology was required, and sometimes more than one. Um, had Jeremy deal with all your crazy, you know, behaviors?
Yeah, I've definitely had some of those apology required moments to Jeremy, to my parents, to friends around me. I had um I yeah, Jeremy's very mild mannered, very calm and relaxed personality. His most likely response in those moments is to just quietly get up and leave the room and come back when I'm calm, which is a signal to me that I'm going off the rails. I had one particular moment with one of my best friends who, just being kind and wanting to be supportive, came over to spend some time with me and brought a big, huge box with all these cupcakes. And I snapped at her and I said something along the lines of like, "What are you thinking? Like, I just had a stroke because of a blood clot in my brain, and like you're bringing me junk food. I can't eat this junk food." And it was like, and it was just completely unreasonable. Like, all I had to do was say thank you, I'll eat it later, and then not eat it. But it was a completely unreasonable response on my. So I've had those moments with my parents as well.
Yeah. They just bring food because food is such an emotional thing, isn't it? That's how people connect with people, over a plate of food, over a coffee. So they just do those things that make them feel emotionally a little better, and they don't realize. But nor should they realize they've never had a stroke. We don't want them to have a stroke. We don't want them to know what it's like. So, so it's kind of good when they are so oblivious to it, because that means they've never had our experience, and that's what I got. That was the lesson, one of the lessons I learned, and how I was able to modulate um, my advice giving at that moment when they were just trying to be nice.
Yeah.
Tell me about what else you experienced. Do you have fatigue, cognitive fatigue, and those types of things? Are you finding yourself hitting these little virtual walls during the day that you have to stop and rest for?
Yes, definitely more so after the TIA. I had it in the beginning after the original stroke. It was much worse after the craniotomy. A lot of the symptoms that I've experienced are actually from the craniotomy, not from the stroke.
Yeah.
At least as far as I can figure.
Yeah.
A lot of the symptoms that I experience are more from that surgery than from anything else. But I did have the fatigue from the stroke as well. It's much more pronounced after the TIA, and I'm only 2 weeks
Beyond
post
it.
TIA, so it's
Yeah.
very early.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm finding myself sleeping a full 8.5, 9 hour night, and then still having to take a nap during the day, and then still feeling tired.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of in that stage. I had some damage to my retina from the stroke, from the original stroke. I can see, I can read, I can work on the computer, but it is definitely makes me more tired than it did before.
Yeah.
Staring at the screen, especially type on the screen, is very difficult.
Yeah. So I imagine you've already read up on to get an understanding of the things that will overstimulate the brain, like screens, like sounds, like lighting. So if you minimize that when you're feeling the way that you're feeling, it'll get better. And one of the things is that you need to look into and you need to research is the right kind of diet for decreasing inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you the very basic version of that. It's a very low carb diet, especially people recovering from a brain injury. The diet needs to be high fat. And when I'm talking about fat, not KFC, McDonald's type of fats, like just, avocado, those types of amazing fats, and fats that come from protein, from animal fats, if you're that way inclined, and low carbs, because what carbs do is that they'll spike insulin, they'll spike cortisol, they'll increase blood pressure, they'll increase all these things in the body. And those things, as they spike and increase, they cause the energy high. You get that boost, and then you have that real quick energy drop off when they get used or sorted out. And then that puts people into a greater space of fatigue. While the brain's already fatiguing, it creates this added level of fatigue. So if you want to minimize that, then that's a good way to go. You look at a book called Grain Brain by Dr. David Perlmutter, and you look at a book called Eat Fat, Get Thin by Dr. Mark Hyman. And I know that the book says eat fat, get thin, and it's not about weight loss, actually. It's actually about how we metabolize food and how the body deals with certain foods. And then why fat is a good thing to add to your diet, especially saturated fats that come in a form of a vegetable or from animals that have been pasture raised and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure, have you had some time to look into that yet?
No, you know what I find interesting, and Jeremy has commented on this a few times as well. All of the doctors that I've been treated by, and I've now been hospitalized at 4 different hospitals. I've seen probably 30 doctors of all different specialties. Not one person has mentioned diet to me, and I found that interesting. And I didn't have tons of concerns about that initially because I was a marathon runner. I was already a very healthy eater. But now after this most recent episode and trying to sort out and figure out why it happened, I'm definitely more curious about that because nobody's mentioned anything about diet to me.
I'll give you the hint. I'll tell you why. I'll give you the tip. The reason that doctors don't have that conversation is they're more interested in keeping you alive and getting you out of the hospital. And they do that well, so they don't have time to look at diet. However, in Australia, there was a doctor who, and I've interviewed his wife, Belinda Fetke, and I'll add these links to the podcast show notes so people can find them easily, and I'll send you a couple of links as well. Basically, what happened is this particular surgeon, Dr. Gary Fetke, was somebody who experienced a brain tumor. I think it was somewhere in his in the front of his brain, somewhere there. Pituitary tumor. And as a result of him realizing that his time was potentially limited, he started to research how he can support his brain while he was going through all the treatments. He found that a low carb diet was going to support his brain. There was no guarantees of solutions or overcoming everything. And he started to feel better while he was recovering, also going through the medical process. And a number of years after he started feeling better, he started to tell his own patients who were diabetic patients, and he used to be amputating their limbs because they had diabetes and it got so badly. He started telling them about diet. And as a result of that, somebody didn't appreciate him as a doctor who was not a qualified nutritionist doing that. And they took him to court. And while he was recovering from a brain tumor and all the things that were associated with that, and also trying to treat his patients, he was being vilified and taken to court and sued because he was giving nutritional advice.
Oh, good Lord.
So now you know why. That's the reason why. Now, over the years, he beat all of those charges. He was not sued, and he's now giving nutritional advice to his patients, and therefore he's not amputating as many limbs as he used to. And it's an amazing thing, but that is one of the issues as to why doctors don't do that. And what that means is that we miss out on really important information very early on in our recovery. And one of those things is the nutritional part of it. And I remember being almost almost 3 years into my stroke journey while I was recovering from the brain surgery, the craniotomy, and I was in hospital and I was learning how to walk again. And they were bringing me, white bread with margarine, with sugar-infested custards, and all these types of food that I knew were doing nothing to support me getting out of hospital sooner. So I stopped eating that food and I asked mum and dad to create meals for me and bring them in on a daily basis. And that's what I ate. And when I was in that space, it was a number of years ago. So it was very early on in the whole low carb nutritional kind of thing and there wasn't enough information. So I just spent the majority of my time researching, and then I created the podcast so I can share this kind of information and bring those types of people in. That is one of the things that we can control the most, our diet, and we can make a massive difference to how we support our brain in the recovery. And that means that we can have better outcomes, get out of hospital sooner, get back to work sooner, get back to a productive life sooner. So I love that you're so curious and you're willing to look at anything, because these interventions don't cost us anything to do. We don't have to employ anybody, pay anybody. We just have to buy less things or different things and put different things in our shopping basket.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it is kind of that taking responsibility for your own recovery kind of idea again. And I think one of the reasons also why doctors don't necessarily address that issue is I think a lot of doctors, maybe not all of them, but a lot of doctors don't have training in that area either. They know their specialty, they're good at their specialty.
Yep.
But, and I know one specific neurosurgeon that's sort of my main doctor. Absolutely love this guy. He's a fantastic doctor for so many reasons. And one of the things that I appreciate about him is he knows what he's an expert in and what he's not an expert in.
Yeah.
And we've had conversations where I'll ask him X, Y, and Z, and he'll say, that's not my expertise. I really would prefer you talk to a specialist about that.
Yeah.
And then he provides me with the referral to that person. And I appreciate that, because if you don't know the answer, I don't want you to give me a bullshit answer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. I also, the way I get really annoyed about it, because they spend so much time, money, effort, resources, technology, all the things that go into bringing a stroke survivor back to life and back to the world. And then they undermine all of that effort with not having this next crucial part of the puzzle. And it's a similar thing that some of those doctors do, who go out of their way to keep us alive, open our heads up, take parts of our brain out, do all these things. And then they say something like, he'll probably never walk again. What's the point of doing all of that? What's the point of going to that much effort to get me out of hospital alive and then potentially tell me that I'm never going to walk again? It might be the case, but don't tell me that. Mm-hmm. Tell me that with a lot of work and effort, I might walk again and I might actually achieve that. And that's kind of where I go on this tangent and get so passionate about it. And you can hear about that in all my other podcast episodes. I always have something to say about these small bits of the puzzle that they just miss, that could just dramatically improve the lives of a lot of people. But I know they're doing their best, and I'm grateful for them, because if it wasn't for them, you and I wouldn't be here.
Absolutely.
So I want to, as we come to the end of the episode, I want to ask you about why it was important for you to get on the podcast. Why did you reach out?
I recently, it was very recently, as a matter of fact, created a specific Instagram profile that's just for stroke and aneurysm survivors, because when I was first diagnosed with this and I was first trying to figure it out, I didn't personally know anybody that was a stroke survivor. I didn't personally know anybody that was an aneurysm survivor. And I was sort of reaching out, trying to find information. I couldn't find anything positive. Everything that I found was scary and negative and horrible and doom and gloom. So I created an Instagram profile that was specifically for stroke and aneurysm survivors. And the intent was to be positive and share what's working and what, and it's just in its infancy. I mean, I have very few followers because I just created it right before you and I were sort of introduced. Yeah. That's also why I'm writing the book right now about my journey as well, to kind of share, because I recognize I've been extraordinarily lucky throughout this journey. A lot of people that have been through what you and I have been through are not as lucky as we have been.
True.
But there are a lot of things that don't have to be as scary, that can be more positive, that can be, that can give you some hope and some future So that's why anything that I can do that can, if there's somebody out there going through this that maybe doesn't have the level of support that I do, that hasn't had the positive experience with the doctors that I've had, and just needs some direction, that's why.
Yeah. I think that's a great thing. And it's so common. You see it again and again and again, stroke survivors that, in the community that we've got on Instagram, um, they go out of their way to support other people, and they might be doing it tougher than anybody. And that's just so interesting and amazing to me that is the first port of call for most stroke survivors, is to make it about somebody else. And it's so fascinating and bizarre at the same time. And it's such a beautiful thing that comes from stroke. Almost immediately people think about, okay, what have I learned that would help somebody else? It's just, it leaves me speechless, and it happens all the time. And I still am not used to that fact. I got to that stage as well, but it took me quite some time to get there. And it was because I had to solve a lot of problems of my own before I could start helping other people. But then when I realized that I had this information, this is not the kind of guy that I was before. I didn't keep that information to myself. I thought, no, this could be handy for a lot of other people. Let me get it out there and let me tell them about it. So I really, I relate to what you're saying, and I can appreciate why you're doing it. And I think it's an amazing thing that you're doing. Have you got a title for the book yet?
I do. In fact, the rough draft is finished. I'm in the editing and revising process now. The title of the book is Be Here Now. And the thinking behind that, the reason I've called it that, is because one of the many, many, many lessons that I've learned throughout this whole process, probably the most important lesson, is to be present, to not worry about the past, not worry about the future, live right here, right now. And that's why I called the book that.
Why is that important? In a few words, tell me, why is living here right now important, and how does that help you in your recovery?
Because I don't have control over what happened. I can't change the fact that I had the stroke. I can't change the fact that I had the aneurysm, that I had the TIA. So worrying about that is not helpful. And I don't have control over what's going to happen in the future. Worrying about what may or may not happen is wasted energy and is probably detrimental to my health. I have control over right here and right now. I have control both from the standpoint of my recovery, but also from the standpoint of just enjoying the moment and not wasting the chances that I've been given. And I've been really fortunate. I don't want to waste it.
Yeah. That sounds like a perfect way to end this podcast episode. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, for reaching out, for doing all the things that you're doing, for writing the book, and for taking responsibility for your own healing journey and your own recovery. And I look forward to the book getting finished. I'd love to have you back on the podcast when it's done, so that we can tell other people about it and we can talk about it. And I just wish you well ongoing.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed the experience.
Discover how to heal your brain after stroke. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com. Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.